Welcome everyone. I hope you're enjoying your NFTs for those who are feeling adventurous. Credit goes to Michael Kovnat for the delicious NFTs. Someone on our team suggested that we fill the NFTs with a colorful ethereal mist that would fade away, float out of your glass. We couldn't do that because you all deserve a cocktail, and we are on hallowed ground here. BetaWorks, our host tonight, invests, accelerates, and builds. They've backed many Web3 startups and NFTs, as well as AI startups, like Hugging Face, you may be familiar with, was started here. And you may notice a number of NFTs on display, many of which are generated using AI models. So thank you to our friends at BetaWorks for hosting. Thank you, Chris, for being here.
Thank you.
Folks, so what follows is this is a live podcast taping for the Next Big Idea podcast. We will be taking questions at the end. And what I tend to tell guests at the beginning of podcasts, which usually is before the recording begins, is, and so there'll be an hour-long recorded version of this that's released a week from tomorrow on the podcast. So Chris, know that this will be edited. And so if you want to stop and rephrase a sentence, you're welcome to do so.
Good, thank you.
Chris Dixon, welcome to the Next Big Idea.
Thank you for having me. Should I hold this like this, or can you hear me like this?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe a little farther away. Okay.
Yeah, I think a little further. Yeah. I'm always told, our producer always tells me like chakra distance.
Okay. Sorry, I'm still getting used to this. So, well, by the way, it's great to be here. A lot of old friends are here. I just saw Dennis and Rufus and John Borthwick. I spent many years in the New York tech world. I still spend a lot of time in New York. I consider New York, though, my really kind of my home. And was here for a very long time. In the 2000s, I think were particularly, for me at least, a special time in my life in many ways, but also in my career. Actually, for those who, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the book yet, probably not, it just came out, but there's a lot of it talking about that era, the kind of Web 2 era, and I spent that time here with people like John, and we're involved with a bunch of projects, and it was just a really exciting time. Should I just jump into this?
Well, actually, no. Let me tee you up. I'm going to tee you up. Okay.
I have a problem. Of concision. I was doing like CNBC and things this week, and the problem is every time I speak, I go on for 45 minutes. So I will try very hard to not do that tonight.
No. We love the riffing.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, Chris, congratulations on the publication of Read, Write, Own, which came out yesterday. It's an exciting moment. I understand you actually wrote the book. Not everybody thought that you would because you have a relatively large day job.
I've gotten these funny reactions. Like I just talked to The Economist, a podcast, and she was like, I did not expect the book to be like, I think she said it's like so academic or something. I don't know. I think like the expectation was you run a fund and it's going to be like, 7 habits of successful people. I don't know, like a motivational advice or something. It's not, for those, when you read the book, it's not, hopefully it's not academic, but it's definitely, like a book. Like it's like that actually makes an argument. And I spent a long time on it, which I don't know if you want to go into, but very long time on it, and it's footnotes and the whole thing. But a lot of it's my lived experience of being. I spent my career on the internet, and I wanted to share that experience, and then of course tell the story of how I see the future. Through that lens, and anyways, but
well, you picked a hell of a time to publish this book, right? Because it reads almost like a manifesto about the potential of blockchain technology to liberate us as digital citizens. 2 years ago, that would have been more of a consensus view.
Yeah.
This morning, I saw someone describe Web3 as, quote, an enormous grift that is pouring lighter fluid on our already smoldering planet.
Yeah.
So you've got some headwinds that you're going into as you go out on your book tour, which makes it interesting, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's best to start with your story.
Yeah.
I mean, you've witnessed various stages of the evolution of the web, and I think that's impacted your perspective and your view of what the internet could be in the future. Do you want to share a little bit about your journey?
Maybe I won't like bore you with all my personal details, but I do think it relates to the book and why I'm doing this and why I'm sort of care about these topics. So I was in college in New York in the 90s, and was in actually a philosophy program and thought my parents were academics and thought I would be an academic. And then I started reading like Wired magazine and all these other kinds of, I'd meet people working in the internet and sort of this is like sort of the late .com bubble in the late 90s. And for me, it was a real epiphany. It was this idea, a couple of things. I mean, one, I didn't know you could sort of, this world existed where you could go and build products and be an entrepreneur. And I just, I'd come from Ohio. My parents were English professors. And it was just like, wow, that seems like a cool, like what you were doing.
Yeah.
I think maybe Nerve was in the late 90s, right?
97.
I think I probably read about you and a bunch of other folks, and I was like, wow, that's just like kind of a cool thing you can do. I thought, because I kind of had this cartoon version of business that it was like all, I don't know, people in suits selling stuff or something, and like you could actually like invent stuff, and it sounded sort of adventurous and swashbuckling and cool or something, and so that was part of it, but a lot of it was the internet was like, whoa, this, it kind of, in some ways it was inevitable that we'd link all the computers in the world together, right? I mean, you sort of think about, okay, you've got all these computers, why wouldn't you connect them, right? And people had like labs, like LANs, and they connected computers. But the fact that we connected them in a decentralized way, right, that there was no company in the middle, was this a really remarkable thing.
Yeah.
And for me, that was, I mean, I sort of see myself as almost an accidental technologist in the sense that I really fell in love with this idea. I think a lot of I think maybe you did, we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in that era were really motivated by that this was a really, really powerful new thing that anybody in the world could put up a website, or email and web and sort of the early networks that are built on, so there's the internet and then there's the networks built on top, like email and the web, particularly the web, the World Wide Web, and that you would have your sort of little plot of land, right? You could put up a website and you could build whatever you want, and you could be an artist, or you could be an entrepreneur, or or you could have a small business, or you could be Jeff Bezos or Larry Page and try to have a big business, but it was your little plot of land and you owned that, right? And you could be anywhere in the world. And for those, probably most folks here are too young, but like there was this whole kind of almost like idealistic political movement around it with like, the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, and
John Perry Barlow.
Yeah, and Clue Train Manifesto, and just like there was this whole series of like books about it. It was like this new era, and there's Wired magazine, all these magazines, and it was this culture, right?
Yep.
And it really felt revolutionary. It felt like this revolutionary fervor. And I like, maybe I'm naive, but I bought into it. Like I really thought it was powerful. And so but then there was but if you're going to go back and like Internet Archive and look at the 90s web, it was very, it was what I call in the book skeuomorphic. And so skeuomorphic is a term that Steve Jobs would use to refer to design when you see like the grainy bookshelf in the book app. It's sort of design that makes you look like something older. Yeah. And other people have sort of started using the word skeuomorphic in a broader sense to refer to when a new form of media comes along, you often will kind of port over tropes and design patterns from prior forms of media. So early films were like filmed plays, and then over time, they developed kind of the close-up and the establishing shot. And this is I think like probably Marshall McLuhan and all these media theorists talk about this pattern, right? We have the first era of media is always skeuomorphic. I don't know if they use that word, but like, I think there's another word for it in media theory. I don't know, but the 90s web is like this in the sense that it was kind of a one-way medium. This is why read, write, own. It was read only. It was you would consume stuff. So like the websites looked like magazines or brochures, and there was some like submit buttons and things.
Yeah. We actually called them online magazines.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, like the early Apple interface had like a bookshelf for your books and a trash can, and
the early web was like that, right? So you'd sort of take, because people were like, "What? This thing's too new." It's almost you almost do the skeuomorphic thing because otherwise it's like you have future shock, right? It's like jarring, right? Because like people come along and they're like, "What is this thing?" It's on the computer. It's like hit a button, and oh, it's a magazine. Okay, I kind of get it, right? And so that was the 90s web, and I got it sort of to early 2000s. Then the crash happened, and for those again who weren't there, it was a little bit like what you're describing now with the smoldering ruins. Like it was ugly. People really. It sounds absurd now, but people really thought it was. They didn't think it was over. It's different, right? Like. The numbers were still going up. I mean, first of all, it was all mostly narrowband, meaning you had to dial up. Like you didn't have broadband penetration wasn't very high. But it was the idea that it would be a business was the kind of thing people were very skeptical of. It'll be this thing you use. You'll buy your plane tickets, you'll email, but this all of these visions of the 90s that it's going to revolutionize the planet and revolutionize business, that was all overhyped, right?
Yeah.
You remember this. Like,
Oh, yes.
People that weren't there, like, they think, oh, you're exaggerating it. Everyone knew the internet was inevitable. No, it was not. It was really bad. Like, it was like very negative sentiment, right? And I guess I was at the time just naive enough or whatever. I was excited enough about it and got into it. And so, and then that era, which I don't call it, people called it the read-write era. That's not my phrase. They also called it Web 2, but those were the two kind of competing words for it. In fact, a very popular blog at the time was called the Read-Write Web. And the idea was that, okay, we're going to pull ourselves out of these smoldering ruins. And this was, John remembers this, and I think Dennis, when you started Dodgeball, right? I mean, exactly, I think it was 2001 or 2, right? I think. Yeah, ITP at NYU was like kind of a hub of this. There was a whole kind of little movement. Tumblr was a little bit later, but the idea is, okay, let's pull ourselves out of these smoldering ruins, right? Let's build something cool, and let's do it by embracing what is special about this medium. And what's special about this medium was that it was a two-way medium, that you could create. You could not only democratize the consumption of information, you could democratize the publishing of information, right? And so that began as blogging. And that was, you'd roll your own blog with RSS and these other protocols. And then blogging, I think of it as blogging had like different genres within it.
Yeah.
And there was sort of micro blogging, like link blogging they call it. There was tumble blogging, which was like photo blogging. There was long form blogging, right? And I think of that as kind of the genealogical tree, the primordial soup through which you can sort of trace all the modern social networks back to these different, kind of archetypes of blogging culture of the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
And then you had sort of, like you often have in technology movements, you had the purists of like the blogger types, and then you had the pragmatists who were like the Zuckerberg types, right? Who sort of took the Bill Gates who kind of saw what the purists were doing and said, no, I'm going to productize this, and took what the bloggers were the indie bands in Brooklyn, and then Mark Zuckerberg was the I don't know, the metal band in Milwaukee playing the stadium or something, right? Like he took this kind of movement and made it. I probably butchered that music reference. I'm not a music person, but he sort of like took it mainstream, and so that was just. And anyways, this is all a long-winded way of saying, for me, this was a very magical time in New York in the 2000s. In New York, a lot of it was happening in New York, with like Tumblr and Etsy and Kickstarter and,
right.
And like Union Square Ventures and what Dennis was doing with, I don't know if Scott Heiferman, someone said he might be here, Meetup.
Yeah.
BetaWorks was a central hub for all of this. So anyway, so that was...
Yeah,
I'm going on.
And then we had this acceleration of corporate networks, right? We had we had this something happened that we didn't see coming, right? With corporate networks.
And this is what it took me a long time to diagnose this, and I try to do this in the book, and this is in the beginning of the book. I almost think the book, you can almost even if you don't believe. All the arguments I make in the sort of second half of the book about blockchains, and you just don't believe and you're a skeptic, fine. I think in the first part, I would argue I have a correct diagnosis of how the internet became centralized, and so that's sort of the first part is like what went wrong in my view. But yeah, so the way I view it is there was sort of this Faustian bargain in the 2000s, which is on the one hand, we did get this vision, did get realized, which is the web became truly democratic, anyone could publish, right? And look, and it's amazing. Like the fact that if you time traveled back to 2002 and said to somebody, you've got 5 billion people with supercomputers in your pockets, and you can push a button and tap into all of global knowledge, and it's basically, like, I think it's like $10 to get an Android phone, and you can get free internet service. Like, it's a remarkable thing that happened. Like, I mean, I think the computing industry did a lot of good, and I don't want to like the book's sort of critical, so I want to make that I try to make that really clear. I'm generally think that technology has been a very positive force in this way, but I do think there was sort of this trade that we made, which is in order to get that result, we did that by handing power over to what turned out to be a very small set of big companies, right? I mean, we didn't know that back then. And specifically, there was a moment in the mid to late 2000s, I believe, where it was still a question as to whether social networking, which really is the most important application in terms of just time spent online, money spent online, there was a moment, probably up until 2007 or 8 or so, where that could have been an open protocol, specifically RSS, was a very popular protocol, which at one point was more popular than Twitter and Facebook, which was an open way to do social networking, right? And you could imagine there's an alternative history. On Earth 2, they are using, in 2024, we're using TikTok and everything else, but they're all just different payloads being fed through an RSS protocol. And on Earth 2, I think I would argue, in the book I argue, you have a very different result in terms of particularly the economic result. That's really my focus in a lot of the book, which is because of the fact that you had these 5 companies, so networks have what are called take rates, and the take rate is the percentage of the revenue that's sort of flowing through the network that's taken by the toll keeper, by the centralized entity. And the social networks today, there's the top 5 social networks, about 150 billion in revenue last year, and they have 100%, outside of YouTube, YouTube has a 45% take rate, the rest all have 100% take rates, which means you have sort of these, the way I think of it is like you have these roads, like imagine the internet like the highway system, and all of this money flowing around in commerce, but then these incredibly high toll keepers. And it's because of the way the system's set up, it's opaque, you don't realize it. So you wake up in the morning and you go to TikTok, and you don't go for TikTok's content. It's not like Netflix where they pay for the content, where you're going to see some other user. And then TikTok is putting ads up, and TikTok is making tens of billions of dollars. And they're not sharing, they have these de minimis creator funds, which are sub 1% of the revenue, which I think are immaterial. But basically they aren't sharing the revenue. But because you don't really see any of that money, people don't fully realize the trade we made, right?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, it was a fantastic thing that happened, right? The internet and all the things that we enjoy. And on the other hand, I think the trade was now we have five or so companies. And then one last thing, if I could, I argue that AI and all the other kind of trends, which is very positive on AI, I think it's an amazing thing, but I do think that I worry we are headed to a world where it's getting so consolidated that it's going to become like 70s broadcast TV or something, where you really have 3 channels. And even now, like, there's further things, like, for example, all the social networks are now punishing you if you link out to the web. I don't know if people follow this. Epic and Apple are having this big lawsuit about linking out and paying out. I think very soon you're going to have just this whole, so they basically have switched from like fighting over market share to fighting over keeping you in the app most of the time.
Yeah.
And then with AI, again, I'm pro AI. I think I'm pro open source AI, I should say. I'm a very big believer in open source, but I'm generally pro AI. But I think, look, AI tends to favor companies that are well capitalized and have lots of data, and that will play. Mark Zuckerberg just said they bought 350,000 H100s, which is $10 billion of GPUs. Now, and to their credit, they are the one big tech company open sourcing. But the point just being that this will just continue to consolidate. And so the question we have, I think, before us is that a good thing or not? Maybe there's policy solutions for it, and I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. I also would argue there are technology solutions, and sort of the core argument to my book is that blockchains, which, as you pointed out, have been so maligned and associated with grift and casino culture and fraud and everything else, I argue that essentially they are tools, and they can be used for bad, as we've seen, but they can also be used for good. And the point of the book is to make that case.
Yeah. So to paraphrase this Faustian bargain that we made. I mean, to be fair, in the late '90s, it was a lot of work to get a website up, right? I mean, it was expensive and it was difficult.
How much did venture did you remember? Like Boo.com raised $100 million, and they spent You spent $100 million to get a website up. Like,
right.
People would do that. Like,
yeah.
Like,
I mean, even just to put up a basic to do what we can do today with WordPress or even Substack would cost. It cost us $1 million to build Nerve.com
but for web hosting
98, 99. Whereas today this would be free.
Yeah.
So the Faustian bargain was, on the one hand, we're going to get all these free ability to publish, free ability to communicate with our friends. But then we wake up and realize this entire identity that we've created, our relationship with everybody around us, is actually owned by, we wake up and we realize we're in Disneyland. And in Disneyland, hot dogs are really expensive, and everything is owned by this corporation. So you built up a Twitter audience. You can't take your handle, can't take your relationships and move them somewhere else. As you pointed out, the open protocols we had in the early internet with email and HTML It was a little bit like a collaboration. I love this metaphor you have of a collaboration that you see in a city between public space and private space, right? That we have shared public roads and parks and services, and cities are incredibly dynamic because you have this combination of this partnership. Whereas what we have emerging in a Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or so on looks a lot more like a Disneyland. And I think the imminent question in front of us is, what do we want to have in the next 10, 20, 30 years as the metaverse is born, as these new spaces are born? And I think your thesis is the blockchain technology is necessary in order to create a more egalitarian future. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it's, you say necessary, like I think there are, for example, maybe you could achieve some of these things through regulation and policy. I don't know. I haven't seen good proposals for that. But for example, people have ideas around data portability where you can export your names from one social network to another. So I don't want to dismiss all the other possibilities.
Yeah.
And look, new things could come along. So maybe if you want me to, I can jump into what I think of the blockchains, or maybe just right before. Maybe I can finish the kind of motivation side. So
sure.
So yes, so I've been involved. So I got interested in the sort of blockchains. I sort of put my toe in the water about 10 years ago, and then got more and more interested in it, and was obviously very disappointed a few years ago to see what happened, with FTX and all these other kind of fiascos, because this was just obviously not why I was doing this. And then for me, that was a kind of a crossroads moment of like, do you kind of give up, and like maybe this has just been kind of burned, and like as you've said, this is an interesting time.
And did you consider giving up?
It was very frustrating. I mean, I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated with it, for sure. Well, look, I thought of it two ways. On one hand, I kind of went back and forth. I'm like feeling, depressed. And then the other side of me said, well, maybe this is an incredible opportunity, because it's not very often in technology. I've never seen a situation in technology where the gap between what I believe is the truth of the technology, or the potential of the technology, and the perception is so wide, right? So like AI, it's, I think AI is awesome, but most of the world does. And maybe people will write a book and you'll have like a different take on it, but it's not going to be that wide, right? It's like, it's really awesome or super awesome or whatever, but like it's not, it's not like half the world saying it's, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll see what happens. It might get politicized to the point where, in the future, where it is that controversial. But right now, it's not. But with this, it's clearly this big gap. So right, there's two ways to approach it. One is you get kind of depressed about it. And the other, I said, I tried to look on the bright side. I was like, has there ever been an opportunity, like in my career, will I ever have a chance to try to close that gap, and specifically to write a book? So that's what motivated me. I was like, let me write a book that explains my view, and why I'm not sort of, hopefully not completely crazy, and tries to make the case as to why this technology is actually, that appears in many ways bad, actually can be quite good. So I tried to flip it around. That was my motivation. So I kind of, and also, frankly, it was a test for me, because I think, it's one thing to believe something, I found personally, but it's another thing to write it out in detail and have to force yourself. And I think if you read the book, I hope you'll find that, like, I really don't make claims that I don't, I hope you find this, like, every claim I make, I walk through examples, and I'm very, very specific. And that was partly for the reader, but partly for myself, because I really, really wanted to, like, prove it. And there's like 36 pages of endnotes, and like, it's a full thing, like I really wanted it to be like a test to myself, but also a proof to the reader that like this is, you can really make this case. This is the story of the book.
Now, to put a finer point on what that moment was like for you, when FTX collapsed and we had what I guess some people might characterize as the beginning of a kind of blockchain winter. So you had, as I think many people know, you are the founder of the A16Z crypto fund, which has deployed $7 billion in investments in crypto and Web3 technologies. So it's fair to say you have a dog in this hunt. You were a hero in early 2022. You ranked #1 on Forbes' Midas list of top venture capitalists in the world. And then what happened? November 2022 was a doozy, right? FTX goes bankrupt, tainting the industry. And then ChatGPT launches at the end of November and becomes the fastest growing application in history, right? And I think a lot of people had this view that like, yeah, I've been hearing about blockchain, it sounds cool, but you know, these guys have had 10 years plus to actually create an application or something that is really useful for at a large scale, and it hasn't happened. And this, meanwhile, this new AI product is extraordinary. Yeah. And I think there was a sense that it was sort of eclipsed. Is that how would you characterize that? That moment and kind of what that has done to the industry.
Yeah, so I guess I don't think of it as, I don't think, so I remember going back to the last era, right, there was sort of these three buzzwords, mobile, social, cloud. And that was, kind of the jargony words in 2008 or 9. And what ended up happening is they were all real, right, mobile and social and the cloud computing were all real. And in fact, they reinforced each other. So, for example, mobile is what allowed 5 billion people to have smartphones. Social is the kind of killer app that makes people want to have them, and cloud is the infrastructure that supports them. And I've been consistent for a long time. I started an AI company in 2008. I've been blogging about AI, I've made AI investments. So I've been saying for a long time, I believe this still. It's sort of VR and whatever, new computing devices, AI, and blockchains. And so I think if anything, and we can talk more about it later, I think if anything, AI is going to help blockchains because I think in many ways they complement each other. So I didn't think of it that way, and I think this stuff is really cool, and I think what ChatGPT's done is amazing, and I know there's a bunch of probably entrepreneurs here working on it. So I think it's I think it's generally, there's all these questions around what will it mean for creative people's business models and deep fakes, and so there's a lot of questions to grapple with, but I think it's generally a good thing. And then, let me just also say, we were not investors in FTX, just to be clear. But most of the things that did have, in fact, all of the kind of scandals we were not involved with directly, but it tainted the industry for sure. So that was the part I was more upset about. It's just that, I see it as a technology that's very positive, and it was tainted by those incidents. And getting that message through, just to be clear. So, yeah.
It reminds me very much, we were talking earlier about it, it reminds me very much of March 2000, which you and I remember, which is when we had the original dot-com implosion. And what I remember about it is that everybody was saying that there was, for people who were inside the industry, which is a small number of people, it was devastating. I'd say 90% of my friends in New York who were building internet-related companies lost their jobs within 6 to 12 months. But for everyone who wasn't in the industry, which is most people, they were actually elated, right? Because there had been this sense that there are all these, there are people reinventing the world through this internet thing, and I missed out. There was a sense of FOMO, and people are getting rich, and I'm sitting on my couch not getting rich. And then the whole thing collapses. Pets.com, why would anyone ever buy pet food over the internet? That was so stupid. The whole thing was a fraud. Right, that was how people responded in 2000, 2001, with a sense of relief and kind of delight. I remember friends at Condé Nast who were like, we were totally right not to invest in the internet. That whole thing was a total distraction. Obviously, fast forward a couple decades, and some people do actually buy pet food online. And Chewy, we were talking earlier, how much is Chewy worth?
Yeah, it was a big successful company. I don't know the details,
right.
But
but I think it feels to me like, even though I'm still in the process of trying to assess whether or not blockchain will be critical to our future, it does seem to me like there's something similar happening in the last 18 to 24 months with the response to the blockchain, headwinds recently, right? Which is a sense that instead of being angry at myself for not buying Bitcoin or feeling like I missed out, it's kind of exciting. It's a much better answer to say the whole thing was a scam.
I think it's a common pattern in markets, and specifically technology markets, to have periods of over-enthusiasm and then over-pessimism, essentially. And by the way, AI, it's funny enough, but look up Wikipedia, there was an AI bubble in the 80s, literally in the 1980s, expert systems. There's a long history of this in all these areas of technology, of these sort of ups and downs. And I guess my view is that you can't predict the future, but it can help if you kind of break, the way I think about trying to predict the future. Let me give you an example. Social media in the mid-2000s, and I probably heard this from someone like John. I remember maybe even you telling me this. 2006, it was very easy to laugh at Twitter or 7 or whatever, as this place nerds talking about their burrito they had or something, and for lunch, right? I mean, and that was that for a long time, that was the narrative. But, and of course it ended up, determining elections and culture and business and being vastly important. How would you have figured that out in 2007? I think the only way you would have is if you really looked and peered into the essence of the technology. You said, what is this really, right? Like, is this really, is there anything in the nature of Twitter that is specific to lunch and nerds talking about lunch? No, it's a micro-messaging protocol. It's a protocol that lets anyone follow anyone and send information. I mean, that's what it really was, right? And so why wouldn't a protocol that lets anyone follow anyone and send them small pieces of information be as applicable to business, culture, politics, et cetera, as it is to burritos, right? And so you need to, my view is, a lot of technologies arrive kind of disguised as something else. They arrive with their sort of accidental trappings. So crypto arrived with Bitcoin, and it had this right-wing libertarian kind of overtone to it, right? Open source software, interestingly, was sort of the reverse, right? It started left-wing, Richard Stallman in the 80s, with this kind of capitalist, everything should be free movement, right? And I think that led a lot of people to underestimate open source software in the 90s. If you go read a lot of the stuff from the 90s, like the Microsoft antitrust trial, and just Linux didn't appear in the business world. I mean, really, like in discussions until probably early 2000s. Even though it was a very powerful force in the 90s. Of course, today it's probably 9% of operating systems in the world, every server, Android phones, every new device. And so, open source software has just completely dominates. It's the vast majority of software in the world. And it was underestimated for a lot of its lifetime because it arrived as this kind of eccentric left-wing thing from MIT, Richard Stallman, far left, it was like this anti-capitalism, whatever it was, like the Richard Stallman thing. And so Bitcoin on the flip side, right, so crypto arrived as this right-wing libertarian, let's take down the government, let's replace them with money. And so I think that has really shaped a lot of the discussion. My argument is you need to look at what is it really, in the same way you'd look at Twitter, like what is this really, this thing, like what does a blockchain really do? And that will help you kind of understand how you can divorce the accidental trappings and all of the laser eyes and people you don't like and all of this have fun staying poor and all this nonsense these people do that destroys the brand. Yeah. And I don't think I'm going to make any friends with those people with the book, or with this podcast, but I think there's just like a lot of kind of cultural baggage that this space has brought along. And like what I'm hoping to do with the book and just generally talking about it and trying to get people involved is to separate those two. Like, let's look at the technology. That's what the book is. So like, look at the technology for what it is. And like, a blockchain is I see it as a computer. Like a blockchain, like Ethereum. Bitcoin is more of a specific application, but Ethereum is a computer. You can write code for it. It's got a programming language called Solidity. You can write. It's a near Turing complete. Like almost like complete as rich a design space as a mobile phone. And you can write arbitrary code for it, and it has new properties in the same way that a mobile phone has new properties, and it has specific properties that let you create a new class of applications. And then you have to look at those applications and say, why are they valuable? And my specific argument is they have a specific type of application that turns out to be really, really important. You can build on a blockchain, which is a network, right? So like part of the thesis of my book is that the internet is a network of networks. What we do, the internet is this sort of IP layer, and on top of it, we build networks. The World Wide Web is a network, email's a network, Twitter's a network, Facebook's a network, Uber's a network, PayPal's a network. And so it's the thing you do, and by the way, this is part of why I wanted to write the book, is the claim I'm making, the internet's a network of networks, I don't think that would be that's kind of consensus among internet veterans, like people that invest in internet companies. But I always found when I went out and talked to people and I explained that blockchains are ways to create networks, they'd be like, why would you want to create a network? And I'm like, oh wait, you didn't have the prerequisite thing. So like part of what I wanted to do with the book is like give that. So anyways, you create networks. So it turns out blockchains are a new type of computer that have new properties that specifically are good at creating networks that have characteristics that basically let you create very powerful new internet services that also have the societal benefits of the early internet. I'm jumping ahead. It's a big argument, but
now let me, for the sake of our listeners who are not as sophisticated as some of our BetaWorks, Cognoscenti. Can we start at the beginning with just explaining exactly what the blockchain is and how it works? Just the basics of distributed ledgers, proof of work. How do these systems work?
Yeah, and so, well, I don't want to bore people with all the details, but I'll try to give
rudimentary.
So essentially, so when I say think of Ethereum is a computer, but it's not a physical computer. It's not a computer you can put in your pocket. It doesn't sit somewhere. It's a virtual computer, and these ideas of virtual computers have been around for a long time outside of blockchain. So there's VMware is a very giant, big public company that creates virtual computers. So a computer is defined as, it goes back to Alan Turing. He has a very famous paper where he first defines what a computer is. He calls it a state machine. It's essentially, it's anything that has the functional properties that you can store information and then manipulate that information through code. Okay, that's what a computer is. And it turns out, I don't know, it's interesting, but computers are substrate neutral, meaning you can build them, using silicon. People have built them with pool balls and water droplets, and you can also build them with a network of computers, which is what a blockchain is. So with a blockchain, you have a set of computers which all kind of come together, and together, as a group, form a virtual computer. And that's what Bitcoin is, that's what Ethereum is. And there's a system where essentially, so in all computers, not just blockchains, you have the current state of the computer, and then you have what's called a state transition, which is it then moves to a new state, right? So on your iPhone, it's happening, billions and billions of times a second. That it's sort of going from one state, the pixels are moving and all these other things are happening, right? On a blockchain, the way it works is that all of these computers that form the network, every so often, it depends on the specific blockchain, come together and vote on the state of the new system, okay? And in Bitcoin, those are called miners. In Ethereum, they're called validators. And then one of the ideas with the blockchain is you want to make it, one of the kind of core ideas is anyone can join the network. Any computer can join the network. It's got to be open, right? That's part of the kind of egalitarian idea behind it. Now, the problem when you make it open is what if you have spammers and other kinds of people who kind of join the network and send a lot of garbage and make bad votes and things. And so that's what one of the innovations of Bitcoin was to have this thing called proof of work, which is essentially an entry fee you have to pay to vote on the state of the system. And it was a way to kind of avoid spam. Think of how you post it. You have to pay postage when you send letters, and if you didn't have to pay postage, you'd someone would send you 1 million letters, and you get junk mail. In the same way, you have sort of an entry fee, right?
And the proof of work is difficult enough and expensive enough that it makes it prohibitively expensive for a third party to try to change the ledger and steal money effectively.
Yeah,
so to this date, as much sort of skepticism as there is out there about the blockchain, I think it's fair to say that Bitcoin has never been hacked.
Bitcoin's never been hacked.
Which is impressive given how many people have attempted to do it. So it's a very secure system, but the cost of the proof of work is bad for the environment, massive energy consumption.
That's right. And no, none of the major blockchains have ever been hacked, like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And if you did hack them, you'd get tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. So people have certainly tried. So it's a very secure system. But as you mentioned, with Bitcoin, you pay a price, which is this energy use that I'm sure people have heard about. There's another system called proof of stake, which is what Ethereum uses and all the modern blockchains use, which don't use that kind of amount of energy. They use, instead of forcing you to do computations, they force you to basically put a little bit of money in escrow, which you then lose if you act dishonestly. And they are, I have a chart in the book, but they are, there is additional overhead as opposed to a traditional server, but it's much, much closer to like a normal server. So it obviates the energy argument, if you want to.
And I'm not sure everyone recognizes that, right? Because I think there's a broad perception that blockchains are burning the planet. But I guess there's a view that there is a solution.
pretty much unique to Bitcoin at this. There are other niche blockchains, but essentially, and the Bitcoin people will never change that because it's almost like a religious belief for them to keep proof of work. People in the space who here will know what I'm talking about. But the rest of the kind of the tech side of the blockchain world, which I put myself on as opposed to the Bitcoin side, has already moved on to a much more energy efficient system. So that's not as that. And by the way, then just while we're on the topics of myths, the idea that you hide things on blockchains There are people working on privacy blockchains where you can hide stuff, but actually on all the major blockchains is actually everything is public. So when you see like billions or whatever, and they're like, I sent you the crypto, or all these TV. I like turn off. I can't watch it when they do that. But it's just not. That's also not accurate. They're all entirely public. They're auditable. They're open to anyone to join. The modern ones do not waste energy. Right. But look, you could still a very reasonable objection. I'm not saying this is all sunshine and rainbows. Like the very reasonable objection is, okay, fine, you do that, but like, what's the point? Like, what's the point beyond, so I would say the class of arguments you're giving, I think they're more easily argued against. To me, the more sophisticated objection is just like, okay, fine, like you can solve the energy thing, you can solve the, the criminal activity, hiding information thing, but like, what's the point? Like, except for trading and speculation. That's the next kind of objection you could make, and that's a fair objection, and that's what and my argument is it turns out there's a really powerful thing you can do with a blockchain, which is you can create internet services that have the advanced functionality that we've come to love about modern internet services. Social networks, games, financial services, services for for creators and media companies and things like this that have all of the kind of advantages of what I call corporate networks, of like the big centralized companies, but have what I describe as the societal benefits of the early internet. So I sort of argue it's a little bit like, the protocol, what I call protocol networks. Most people call them protocols outside of the book. I had to use a little bit eccentric language just because it would get too confusing, because people call blockchain protocols, and this is all messy. So but I basically argue it's kind of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's like protocol networks were this beautiful thing, HTTP, the web, email, that had all these wonderful properties and made the internet open and democratic. Then you made this Faustian bargain where we got corporate networks that had these because we wanted the powerful features, but we traded it by giving away control. And then synthesis, blockchain networks, I believe, can give you the best of both worlds, and that's kind of the a big part of, like, in the book, part 3 on is essentially that argument. And I really try hard in the book, like I don't, like you hear people in the space use words like decentralization. I think it might occur, but I barely use it. Like I really get specific. Like I have a section on take rates, which is the economics of networks. I have a section on network governance. I have a section on basically decentralized software production, open source software, what's called composability, and really try to be specific with stories and examples, and like not, because I think a lot of people in technology, and particularly in the blockchain space, have relied on kind of hype and jargon, and I wanted very much to not do that, and to really show, not tell.
So to people who say, okay, this sounds cool, I get it in concept, but why, we've been talking about it for 10 years, and there's no really broadly adopted super useful application today. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. Like, the first neural network paper was 1943. I think it took 80 years to get to ChatGPT. I think from the outside, sometimes I think, people think smartphones. So go watch. There's a great documentary on General Magic. It was, I think, '93. They were trying to create the iPhone. From my experience, the internet was really the '70s, and then you had the text-based internet in the '80s, and then you had, and I think again, like people like, go watch. You Got Mail. What year was that? I don't know what year. Go watch like The Net, or like Friends. Friends is when years of I think Friends was like '97 to 2003 or something, right? And like the internet. There's one I actually looked it up. There's one episode where they talk about the internet. This is like 2003. This is supposedly after the internet's happened. Like it doesn't exist. It doesn't. People don't. The internet really started. I mean, in the way we think of it as this always-on thing on your phone, that was like kind of. I mean, the iPhone 2007, App Store 2008, but if you look at the data on the iPhone sales, that's kind of 10 years ago. Like so when you really had what we think of as the always-on internet today, like it's pretty recent.
Your point is that this stuff takes time.
It does.
And if you think of like research on neural nets started in the 50s, right? It took
the first paper was 1943.
Right, 60 years, right?
Yeah.
By
the way, what happened with AI is very interesting. I don't know if anyone's written a great book. I'm sure someone will write a great book on it. But it's very interesting what happened, right? You had I mean, lots of brilliant people invented algorithms, transformers, all the stuff we've heard about. But a lot of it was GPUs, and like, why did GPUs get better at video games? Like, it's really an interesting story that, like, you know, kids shooting each other on Fortnite like ended up creating
the innovation
AGI,
that resulted in
which is
AGI,
kind of, you know, it's just So I would say not only does it take a while, it's circuitous, it's unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, timing is a bitch. I mean, predicting, you know, as we know, it's difficult to make predictions, particularly about the future. And you know, we remember we were talking earlier about how, you know, in the late 90s, we were all saying, like, virtual reality is right around the corner.
Well, they had this standard VRML. It was like this thing that was, people thought it was.
I mean, video conferencing we thought was around the corner. It took another 20 years. Maybe in a couple days with the launch of Apple Vision Pro, we might have the beginning of virtual reality. We'll see. You know how long that takes. It might be the next few years. It might take another decade. But I think you said, I mean, you started an AI company in what you said, 2007, 2008. So timing is the hardest piece of the puzzle. We can say that something is highly likely to prove to be useful, but predicting when it's going to be useful is very hard to do. Would you say that? How confident are you that the blockchain will prove to be a super useful technology? Is it just a matter of time, or is it something that we need to fight for in order to make the future of the internet better?
You know, it's funny you said the thing about the AI and ChatGPT, like kind of like saying it would be a bad thing for me or something. It was actually, for me, it was very interesting, right? Because I had started this AI company. It's called Hunch, and we sold it to eBay in 2011. And the product just never was as good as we wanted it to be. Like, I thought it was going to be magical, and just honestly, it was never magical. And if you asked me up until, I don't know, 2019 or something, I would have given you this long list of personal failures, like, you know, it was my fault, we didn't make the product right, we didn't do this. And then I remember seeing ChatGPT, and I was like, fuck, we were just early, like, because it's just like, that's what we wanted. Like, not ChatGPT specifically, but like, it just got so much better, right?
Yeah.
And fundamental, and yes, transformers, algorithms, but a lot of it is, you know, Moore's law, GPUs, and like, and that has this, you know, the reason timing is tricky, right? Is a lot of these things are these compounding feedback loops, right? So it's like GPUs get better because games get better, and games get more money, and then that puts it back into GPUs, and then you have just, you know, then you have all the accidents of history that so-and-so invented this idea, and that so-and-so started this company, and all these sort of things have to come together, right? I mean, but probably like my view, I guess I'm kind of a infrastructure is destiny thing a little bit, like, Steve Jobs is obviously an incredible genius, but probably had he not done the iPhone in 2007, I'm guessing someone would have done a smartphone in the next couple of years.
It became possible.
Yeah, the semiconductors
give or take a
got
few
to
years,
point,
it was going to happen.
Touch screens, like the modems, like all the kind of components, right?
Yeah.
And same thing, like, you know, I think what Sam Altman and those folks and just all the different people working in AI have done is amazing, but probably, right, it was somewhat determined by the underlying infrastructure. And so then if you take it that view, you know, then you ask yourself with blockchains and things, like, look, with blockchains, until even now, like, but especially 2 years ago, it would cost on something like Ethereum $5 when you do a transaction, meaning an action. Okay,
Yeah.
And that was an infrastructure. That is an infrastructure limitation. And so what does that mean? If every time you click on something you have to pay $5, what classes of application are viable in that scenario? Well, speculation, like trading, right? I mean, there are not many things like social networking and gaming where you'll pay $5 to take an action, right? And so, you know, when you look at it through that infrastructure lens, then you start to say, okay, well, how does that curve look, right?
Yeah.
And like now, like in the last 2 years, we've at least gotten it down 10x, and we'll probably be another 10x, I think, soon. I hope.
Yeah.
But like that, like you start to look at I've over time started to look at the world much more through the lens of like, what are the core infrastructure drivers, and what are the trends, and how do you see them going, to try to get a better sense of timing?
Right, right. It could be right, because the question, if you're an LP in A16Z crypto, the question is this AI in the 80s, or is it AI in 2010 or AI in 2022, right? Yeah. I mean, the question of timing becomes highly relevant. Let's get into the question of what some of the most exciting applications are of the blockchain. Yeah. And I think as we get into that, we can also talk about some of the objections. Should we maybe start with NFTs? I think there are a lot of people who sort of think of NFTs as being kind of silly, right? But I think you make an argument in the book that there's actually something more going on.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the way I describe it is generally with sort of tokens. I think of there's a concept I kind of go through in the book. This concept of encapsulation. So encapsulation is a software concept where you take kind of a complex idea and you put it in a simple container. And so I think of the original vision of the web. So not the internet, but the World Wide Web. The original vision was let's have this sea of information, this ocean of information, and anyone in the world can contribute to this ocean of information, right? How does that not become an incredibly overwhelming thing that just like becomes this cacophonous, chaotic mess? The beautiful idea was the website, right? So the website was like this is a container, and this is the unit in which anyone can go and join this sea of information. And then the second great idea, of course, was the hyperlink, and then this is a way to connect these two. So it made a really ambitious, kind of almost crazy idea manageable, right? And so in the next era, the post, right? So you sort of take all, like again, now we're gonna let everyone speak to each other, and we're gonna let them all interact. And so we need a unit, a way to kind of contain that, right? And so what I think of as a token is so the key feature of a blockchain is that, and I didn't get into this really so far, but like the reason you do all of those complicated design things in a blockchain is you want to be able to have what I call a blockchain is a computer that can make commitments. So you do all this stuff so that you can have the computer where you can write code, and you know that the code you write will continue operating as designed. So you can, for example, create code that says if the user owns this name in a social network, I am C. Dixon in the social network, a blockchain can commit to you, because it's a computer that can make commitments, it can commit to you that you really own that name, which means that even if you join one social network and use that name and then they do something you don't like, you own it, and so you can take it with you and move it to the other network. In the same way that you own your website, like it's protocol networks also respect ownership, right? Like if I don't like what my web hosting provider is doing, ifcdixon.org, I can take my website and move it to another hosting provider, and that gives me economic and other kinds of leverage, and that's what a lot of what enabled the first era of the web, right? And so a token is a similar idea, which it encapsulates this kind of idea of ownership, and it can encapsulate an identity. Is one thing you could have. You could have your data, for example, like you could have, all of my preference data or my music tastes, or that could be contained in a token. It's something that I own. It could be an object in a video game. It could be a unit of economic value. It could represent a dollar, like a stable coin. It could be like Bitcoin, or represents this other kind of currency. It's a completely abstract thing, like a website, right?
And it's
a container of ownership, and that's why it's read write own. The new thing a blockchain lets you do is it lets you have computers that can make commitments and can grant ownership, and they do it in the form of a token. And a token is an abstract concept, and it just so happens in the same way that social media began with nerds talking about burritos, NFTs began with people with like PFP avatars and things like this, but don't confuse the accidental kind of use of the technology in the early phases with what it can do in all of its different instantiations.
And in asking the question, which some listeners may be thinking, like, does owning some unique digital thing matter? It seems to be there are 2 points you make in the book that to me are quite powerful. The first is that as it happens in 2018, the gaming industry sold $36 billion in virtual goods. Mm-hmm. And as you point out, a gamer is basically renting that virtual good in the sense that they don't actually own it. They can't take it to any other platform. Humans love to signal status, right? We love having, watches and cars and things that demonstrate to people that we have social status. The fact that in 2018 we already had $36 billion virtual goods in circulation at this point, and we're moving into a world probably in some period of time, it's hard to predict how long, 5, 10, 15, 20 years of a metaverse environment. Yeah. The value of ownership of digital goods is going to be potentially enormously powerful.
So yeah, I think video games, so I don't actually play video games, but I think it's a very interesting industry, and maybe I'll try to explain why. I think of the video game industry as, it's like William Gibson, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Like, to me, that's video games, and that they are the future of media. And let me explain that. So the video game industry prior to the internet had the same model that all media had, which is you have a game and you charge $50 for it, right? Like you have a book, you charge whatever for it. You have a piece of music, you charge whatever, same as everybody else, right? So the internet comes along and the video game industry, and you look at the music industry kind of fought the internet and sued people, and now has moved to streaming, and most of the other media industries have maybe they moved from to ads and paywalls, but they haven't changed that much. The video game industry said, okay, video game industry said, over time, they did a very radical thing, which is they said, let's give away the game, right? So Fortnite, League of Legends, the games are free. Let's give away, the thing we used to charge $50 for, we'll now give away. And in fact, even more so, like streaming, video game streaming, like on Twitch, at first, when it started in the late 2000s, it appeared like copyright infringement. In fact, like Nintendo threatened to sue and things like this, because it was like not only you don't have to buy the game, you can go see it, right, for free. Video game industry not only gave away the game for free, they embraced things like streaming and this and that, right? And they said, instead of charging for the game, we're going to charge for something else. And so like Fortnite is an example. I don't know what the current numbers are, $3 billion in revenue or something, same with League of Legends. The game is free, and they said, and the reason they did that is that the internet, what they realized is that the internet is by nature a copying machine. The internet likes to spread information. People want to share information, they want to stream, they want to meme. And so, like in the book, I call it that basically in media you have this dilemma between what I call the attention monetization dilemma. You have this dilemma where on the one hand you want to have, you're fighting in this Darwinian struggle for attention, right? Every piece of content in media is fighting to be seen. On the other hand, you need to make money, and so the natural way to make money is to add scarcity, right? And so that's why you put it behind a paywall and things like this. So like, the big question for anyone who's creating media on the internet is how do you balance those two things, right? And what the video game industry did that was very interesting, right, is they said, well, let's expand what our product is, right? Instead of like, you could imagine an alternative world where they just said, like, let's give away the first level, and some games do still do this, like you get the first level for free and then you charge for this. You could split it in different ways. But the really advanced video games and where it's all going, and all the forward-looking games do now, is they just give away the whole game, all the levels, the whole thing. You can play all of Fortnite, you can play all of League of Legends, you can play all these, Clash Royale, you can do all these things, play the full game and never spend $1, right? And they said, you know why? Because then we'll just it'll meme, it'll spread, it'll do all these things. And instead, let's add some new thing that didn't exist before, which is this virtual good layer, which is, you can buy the skin and the emote, the dance move when you shoot the guy or whatever. And why would you want that? It's because you are playing a social game and you're in a community and it becomes part of your identity. And for the same reason you'd want a Birkin bag or whatever people do in the real world, like you want this clothes or something, and so Ferrari, and so because that's become your virtual life, and you want to look good, and you want a status signal in that community. And so the video game did that. This very interesting move, and then I have sort of the punchline in that chapter of the book is this chart, which is the music industry, and I didn't show the other industries, but all the other media industries are either down or flat over the life of the internet. And the video game industry went from the same size as the music industry, like roughly 20 billion to 180 billion. Okay, and it's the only. And actually, I think I overlay it in the book. I do, with like each wave of technology, and every time there's a new wave of technology, the video game industry keeps going up, and everyone else is like flat or down, right? So what they've done is they said, okay, what is the nature of the internet? The internet's a copy machine. It's a Darwinian fight for attention. Let's lean into that. Let's let them stream. Let's let them share. That's why you see the video game content everywhere, right? It's like the kids are. It's native to social media. They're sharing it, and let's figure out something else to charge for. And to me, that's one of the interesting things with NFTs is it's basically offering that same promise, if used correctly, to other areas of media, and specifically in an era of generative AI, which I think will put further downward price pressure on, if you're an illustrator today, and like you were making money by selling illustrations, and now Midjourney can do it, for free, it's going to sort of force your hand. This is going back to your question about AI. I think if anything, AI will kind of press forward on a lot of these questions, right? It's going to, as I think it was Lenin, heighten the contradictions, right? Like that's going to kind of break a lot of these kind of delicate balances.
This to me is the most compelling and certainly the most interesting argument for the importance of blockchain in the future. Is this argument that we have? I think the broad perception has been that AI just sort of replaced the blockchain as the the new driver of the future of the internet. But there's an argument that you make in the book that actually a consequence of AI, as we know, is mass proliferation of human-like media and content. And if there's anything that we want to be able to own, it's our own identity and our own words and our own videos and our identity online, right? So non-fungible tokens, NFTs, are perhaps their most powerful and important application could be to certify the provenance of all of our products online. Is that the view? What's the argument?
I think also, I think the thing people are, maybe underestimating is that you then have applications built around them. So like the NFT is not just sort of a thing that has like provenance. It also then hopefully you have a new wave of applications, which, for example, you can take this NFT represents my identity and my follow graph or my tastes, let's say. At my old AI company, we had this thing called the taste graph, like the idea that you would have like my set of tastes. And my set, it's everything I like in the world, right? Like, should that be, like the way I think about it is like, should that be owned by, like, I like Goodreads. I like books, I read a lot of books, and I like Goodreads, but like, I want to own my book data, and I want to be able to shop around to different book sites, right, or different recommendation engines, and I want to take my data and I want to let them use it for that purpose, but I want to own it, right? And I think that's, I don't think it's just like a weird nerd, like I think it's actually quite important that like people own those kinds of digital properties in the future, as people spend 7 hours a day on the internet. Like this idea that the internet is like, there's the real world and the internet, I don't think that's a very viable distinction anymore. It's a very important thing. It drives politics, it drives culture, it drives business.
Yeah.
Like who owns the different aspects of it is a very important issue for the next few decades, right? And so for example, who owns your health data? Who owns your financial data? Who owns your preference data? Who owns all of these? And who control, and so by the way, NFT can control, an NFT, again, it's a container. So an NFT could, for example, contain your entire preference graph, all 10,000 things you like or whatever. Like that it is able to do that. It's not just a picture, right? It's a container of ownership. It's a unit of ownership. If I could add to the AI thing, like another interesting thing. So there's another chapter where I talk about what I call basically we're going to need a new. Basically, we need a new covenant between distribution and content. Let me describe that. So distribution on the internet basically happens through search engines and social networks, right? That's where you go and spend time, and then content is quote unquote is the New York Times, web, media sites, websites, and there's basically over 30 years the things that are linked to or indexed in in search engines, right? Over 30 years, there's evolved an implicit economic covenant between these distribution and content, right? And the covenant is Google, like if I'm a website, like I used to be on this board of Stack Overflow, as an example. It's a programmer website, Q&A website, right? And basically the idea was, okay, we have all this content, we have this Q&A stuff, and Google, you're allowed to index us, and you're allowed to use snippets in the search results. But the deal is, you'll send us back some traffic, right? That's sort of the implicit, it's not generally written in law, but it's generally the implicit covenant, right?
That's why it's the reason that websites allow Google to crawl them.
That's right.
Like, and that's because you can stop Google from crawling.
Yeah, I mean, there's like arguments around, you could have copyright, like perhaps it's fair use. There's, you can do no index. But like in the beginning, in the 90s, people just didn't think it mattered, and then over time, it sort of actually ended up being kind of important. And then, anyway, so that's sort of the covenant, right? So in an AI world, though, like if you go to ChatGPT, or even to like whatever. So if you go to ChatGPT and you say, I want 10 restaurants, and it gives you 10 restaurants, well, are you going to click through anymore, right? I mentioned Stack Overflow because like now you use Copilot, now you use ChatGPT, it gives you the code answer. A lot of that data was trained on Stack Overflow. Like they use that as input. Now Stack Overflow's traffic is down, right? Because you don't need to go there anymore. And maybe they link to it, like there's like Perplexity and some new search engines that link to it, but and it'd be nice if they link to it, but it doesn't, I don't think it really matters, because if you give someone the answer, they don't need to click through, right? And by the way, I'm not saying the AI systems are bad. I think it's, look, if you can give users more utility, that's great, but it does break the covenant, right? It does break the covenant. The covenant was, here's the trade, here's the data, and and this will play out in court, like there's the New York Times OpenAI thing. I think a better solution is, well, why don't we, instead of sort of fighting over the next decade through court cases, shouldn't we, the technology community, be thinking about what is the new covenant? Like, how do we have, and don't we want to to have incentive systems for people to put up content on the internet and not try to hide it. By the way, one of the things that happened after ChatGPT, right, is Twitter started deprecating their API, Reddit started deprecating their API. You're starting to see artists put stuff behind paywalls because they don't want to train on Midjourney.
Yeah.
And so, like, my concern is we're going to end up with 5 websites that are big AI systems that have all the data. You know, how do they? You know, a new genre comes along of paintings, and they want to get trained on it. Now, maybe all of the you know, artists have put their stuff behind paywalls, and maybe the AI systems do what some of them are doing now, which is they, you know, have these sort of data entry, offshore data entry things feeding they need new training data, and they'll get it somehow. But to me, it seems like a much better outcome to think about new incentive systems that will incentivize creators. And so this, to me, and what is a blockchain? One way to think of a blockchain is it's a way to design networks, economic networks that mediate the relationship between various parties on the internet, including content providers and distribution systems.
So the notion is that if we're blogging, this can both a system like this can both track the provenance of individual blog posts that was created by an individual human and you know, keep a record of that, but also potentially create a payment system. So I could be compensated if GPT-4 is hoovering in my content and using it. And
if your content ends up being
people,
useful, maybe there's a way, you know, there's a new economic system you can design where the money cascades back according to the contribution to the system, as an example. And I would argue it's in everyone's interest to do that. Like, we shouldn't fight it out in court. It's a better internet. It's better. I think it's better for the AI systems if you want to feed the input systems, right? Like, why are we making this adversarial? Like, I think we all want to see an internet where people are compensated for their contribution. We want to see an internet where people are, you know, joining and adding content and is vibrant and lively, and not sort of this, what I see as a slightly dystopian sort of 5 big companies with offshore data centers feeding new training data, as an example.
Now, if the claim is that this is the best way to establish ownership online, what about the slippage between the connection between me, Rufus, and my online identity? Right, I mean, like my iPhone provides a solution for that. Apple ID projects 30,000 dots on my face and confirms who I am. Right, but there has been theft and fraud in blockchain systems, and there are problems with that connection between human in meat space and digital identity. I mean, would some people argue that you haven't solved the security problem if you haven't solved?
Yeah, I think maybe it's just a slightly easier one to start with would be something like deepfakes. So, deepfakes, of course, like, we basically have relied on video as the ground truth for, it's everyone's yelling at each other and debating stuff on social media, but then you see the video and you're like, okay, that's what actually happened. Turns out that's not going to work anymore because you're going to have AI that can do that, and then you also have the ability to have very sophisticated phishing and fake people. And so what that suggests is CAPTCHAs aren't going to work anymore. And so what that suggests is you need better systems for what you're describing, which is like, how do you identify it's a real person? How do you identify the provenance of a video? And so think about the provenance of video. You want to say this video came from, the New York Times attests that this video is real. Okay, like, you want some kind of system like that, and a natural way to do that is you'd use cryptography, and there's a way to do it with what are called hash functions, and you sort of say, like, this, you can prove this came from the New York Times, but you need to store that somewhere. And so one example I talk about in the book is, like, that's also a natural use for blockchains. Blockchain is a community-owned database. Was one way to look at it, and there are systems being built where you can have an attestation system where you can track the provenance of this video and know where it came from, and then decide whether you trust it and do similar things for people. And you're going to need these systems. Like, I think in an AI world, we need these systems. And my argument is, what we've seen in the history of the internet is if we don't step in with a kind of a public good, with a shared good, someone will step in with a private good. Facebook will do it. Apple's the leading contender to do that right now, right? They have your face, they have all of this stuff, and maybe they'll end up providing that. But the price of it, of course, is the lock into their ecosystem, the 30% tax, all of the other kinds of things.
Your point is that an Apple or a Google could provide this kind of proof of personhood and this security, but the cost is you're in Disneyland, and and over time, at some point, you're going to be charged.
I think all of these problems
fees
will get solved because they have to get solved. Like, the world is not going to allow us to be awash in deepfakes and phishing. Like, something is going to solve it. And to me, the interesting question is, does it get solved through something that I consider a blockchain sort of solution, a public good, or does it get solved through another private company solution? And in doing so, we simply make those companies more powerful, and then end up with this world of the 3 or 4 companies.
And do you think this is an important inflection point with the, with the promise of a potential growing metaverse when we think about how that is built? Right, and how it's structured. Do you see in the next 5 years, 10 years, an important kind of time horizon for collectively concluding on how, is this all going to be in Meta, or is it all going to be in Apple's spatial computing universe, or are we going to build something that's a hybrid of a public and private system?
Yeah, I mean, so metaverse is another word like blockchains, which I think, I guess at the moment, is people are pessimistic about. I don't know, maybe not. Like, I guess Apple's calling it spatial computing. I think of metaverse, and there's different ways to think about it. There's sort of the VR and the device level. I think there's another way to think of it, which is just that people are clearly spending more and more time, especially kids as they get older, in 3D virtual environments, right? Like games and other kinds of things. I think clearly that whether you actually have a headset on or not, that 3D environments will become more common, more persistent, higher fidelity, and a bigger part of the internet experience. In the same way that the internet moved from like kind of asynchronous to live, it'll move to more 3-dimensional and spatial over time. And then a question, of course, that naturally comes up if you look at the world the way I do is, how is that world structured? Is it structured as a single company owning it, or 2 companies owning it, or is it structured like the World Wide Web, where it's like this open protocol and anyone can sort of can create a piece of it, right? And maybe you can do that with the World Wide Web, and I talk about it in the book, like Tim Sweeney, who's the founder of Epic, and Fortnite, the company that makes Fortnite, has a great podcast I highly recommend. I cite it in the notes, where he talks about like how the protocols you need for an open internet. He actually thinks a blockchain will be part of it. I think he's not the full part of it, but he's not anti-blockchain, which is unusual for games people. But I think it's like, so whether or not you believe in blockchains, I think that's a very important question. Is like we move into that 3-dimensional world, that metaverse world, and is that a decentralized network like the World Wide Web, or is that 2 companies control it? And to your question, the way I sort of view it is these technologies. Think about ChatGPT. It's kind of, I think it's Hemingway who said, "How'd you go bankrupt and gradually then suddenly?" Like, I think of that as the same thing with technology. I don't know if it was a Hemingway. I don't know. Maybe you can fix it, but tell me the truth. But fix it on the edit. It's the same thing with like think about AI. Like AI was like, oh my God, everyone's talking about it's going to, and then boom, it happens, right? And so my argument is that a lot of these things like metaverse, blockchain, AI systems, all of these things I'm talking about. They're all kind of making incremental progress, but at some point they'll happen faster than you think. And so what I part of my book and my pitch is sort of to the other people who share my views that we should have an open internet. I'm kind of trying to do a little bit of a rallying cry to them to say, guys, we got to get our act together and like define all the standards and have the systems ready so that when this world does come, there are viable open alternatives.
Right.
Because I would like to see the metaverse structured that way.
Right. And I guess some would say whether or not the blockchain is what is used as the technology to accomplish this, what's critical is that our identities are portable.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I mean, if you think back to the early open protocol, Web 1.0, we had, open protocol, email, open protocol, HTML, websites, but we didn't build open protocol ownership of our social graph.
Yeah.
Of our identities and our set of relationships, which could have been done hypothetically.
Yeah.
Right?
By the way, that's part of my argument in the book. By the way, like if we could do all of this with sort of what Web 1 protocols, like I would be all for it, and it'd be great. Like I would be all for it. It's been 30. So part of the argument I make, it's been 30 years, and there have been, and I enumerate many of them. There have been hundreds of credible attempts to create new protocol networks, and there are two at scale, and they're email and the web, and they were both created in the 1980s, right? And I argue that's because they were created before there was real competition. And once they had corporate competition, all of the protocol networks have failed. I mean, look, RSS, I don't want to say fit, but like exists for podcasts and things, but when I say succeed, I mean like really competes with the 5 billion users. So I'm not, like, by the way, I'm very pro RSS and protocols, so if anyone listening thinks I'm like, negative. I'm just saying I just want to see it succeed more. Okay, so just the reality is, right, like you look at these things like Blue Sky and like I would love to see it work. It's been 30 years. I've seen so many of these things, and I believe and I argue that it's a fundamental architectural limitation that they're sort of fighting with one arm tied behind their back. Because as you said, specifically, for example, you try to create a social network with these open protocols and you can't keep state and you can't have fun. I make this long argument about how kind of YouTube was started and a lot of social networks. I think people really underestimate the level to which Web 2, these big companies, were built through subsidization. So, you know, the big, all of these companies have spent many billions of dollars. YouTube offered you free hosting when it started. RSS, you had to pay for hosting.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's all these reasons why protocol networks,
Right.
as I call them, like RSS, have not succeeded.
Right.
And if they could, that'd be great. Like if Tim Sweeney's vision would work, I'd be for it. My view is sort of like, I think of those as like the folks who are sort of the Blue Sky RSS people as ideologically aligned. I just disagree on the method. I just think that hasn't worked, and we need to try something new, and not be so emotionally allergic to blockchains just because some people, the laser-eyed people, were there, and I'm going to get a lot of crap on Twitter from the laser-eyed people for this, but just because you don't like the people associated with it, like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is kind of my argument, right?
Now, one way to address this problem of the challenges of switching between different platforms and owning our identities would be with regulation. What's your view? This is a critical time right now for regulation in this space. Yeah. This year, the EU's crypto assets regulation will take effect, creating a legal framework for issuing tokens and supervising transactions. The U.S. has been slower when it comes to regulation. Are we doing enough? Yeah. What's your take?
So I think, and this would be just not only, I think this is also going to play out with AI. These are the two kind of hot policy, probably, new technologies that are getting kind of a lot of policy attention, or crypto/blockchains and AI. I think my kind of core argument is, but what's happening with crypto is it's all playing out in courts. And actually I think AI is about to happen too, with like the New York Times OpenAI. And the problem with the courts is it just takes many, many years. You have uncertainty, and then you have think about, let's just talk about AI for a second. So New York Times is suing OpenAI for copyright infringement, and then at some point you're going to have a judge who's trying to decide if is taking the New York Times content as training data, is it more like copying, or is it more like you're inspired by it, right? And then they're going to sort of interpret some, 50, 100-year-old law and try to decide whether that law was intending that an AI system was inspired or copying. And my argument, there's just no answer. I mean, I'm sure they'll come up with a ruling, but should the greatest country in the world that's led the internet and all these other things decide these important policy questions through some weird philosophical interpretation of a law 100 years ago? Same thing's happening with crypto. I think we should I think instead what we should do, I would argue, is look at the technology in totality, look at the good things, look at the bad things. Like my book is trying to show the good things about blockchains. We've seen the bad things. AI, there's a similar, you can go through, it can create a bioweapon, or it can create a golden age of creativity. There's good and bad to everything, right? You should look at it in its totality, and then in the ideal world, you'd then have a policy that says, how do we maximize the good and minimize the bad, right? And I think the U.S. did an incredible job for that, for the most part, with the internet. There were a lot of really good decisions made in the 90s, the Telecom Act. There were a whole bunch of very forward-looking things, and that's a big reason why the U.S. is so successful, and the world didn't end. I mean, there's obviously bad things on the internet, but I think most people would agree net has been a positive thing.
And so you think the right regulations are important to the success of this new technology?
For sure, yeah.
And you're actively engaged, I think.
In fact, so I think there's also, and particularly, I talk about the casino aspects of blockchains. I think a lot of them we need regulation to rein that in, to dampen and rein that in. I think, I liken it to kind of so the key idea to me as a blockchain is ownership. In the same way, if you own a home, right, and I think we generally think in the real world, the physical world, owning a home ownership is a good thing. Like why owning a home we generally think is a good thing. It's good psychologically, it's nice to own a home. It's good financially. A lot of people's wealth comes through their home ownership. And it's good societally because it aligns incentives, right? Like the evidence shows that people that own homes take care of their homes. They're more likely to join community organizations. Like it aligns incentives, right? As a byproduct of home ownership, we have people that flip houses. We have REITs and speculation, right? And so I think generally the way we look at this in society on the physical world is ownership's an important thing. As a byproduct of ownership, you have some trading and speculation, and then we put rules around the trading and speculation so that it exists. There's some value to the trading around home things. It's why you get your Zestimate and things, because there's a liquid market and the traders are there, right? Price discovery and liquidity. There's some value to speculation. But like what we've decided societally, right, is that there's some value, but you got to circumscribe it, right? You got to make sure it's sort of reined in and it's a level playing field. And there's a bunch of sort of things you want to do. And I would argue it's the same thing here. Like ownership is valuable. There are positives to it. There is some positive to having markets around ownership. Like domain names, we have this. Like you own your domain name, and then there's a domainer market. But it's not a crazy, wild, speculative market. I mean, it's a big. I mean, Voice.com just sold. I have the book 30 million last year. Like there's a whole thing that happens there. But it's sort of, we put the cart before the horse with blockchains, right? We reversed it. It's all about trading and speculation. And I think the best way to rein that in is policy. And so we've been. And we've been actively engaged in policy and trying to have convince people to take a more proactive approach to rein that in. And because look, it's just as you said before, it's why the thing you quoted and all the negative stuff is being said about the space consumers are obviously hurt, and there's all sorts of damage being done. And then of course the risk is that we then sort of ban the whole technology and then lose out on the benefits of it when in fact we want a more nuanced approach.
Final question before getting to questions from the audience. I'd asked earlier whether you saw the adoption of blockchain technology as inevitable or something that we have to fight for in order to create the kind of future of the internet that we'd like to have. 20 years from now, what do you think the probability is that blockchain technology will be an important piece of the foundation of how our digital world works? Would you say it's 50% probability, 80%, 90%? How probable do you think it is that that's the outcome?
I think if it weren't, okay, so I'm a little unusual in this, but I think that the tech world is underestimating the degree to which policy is going to be important for everything, not just blockchains, for AI. I think it's the new world. I think that Silicon Valley technology, internet lived in a kind of this regulation-free zone. Like Peter Thiel talks about this for a long time, and that's over, I believe. And that just in like, you want to build a train line from here to New Haven, and like you're going to deal with a lot of regulation, and like that's how the digital world is going to be, I believe. I think everything is going to be political. So to your question, if we still lived in that kind of digital playground, I think it would be basically inevitable because there's enough people working on it. All of the kind of core trends like the infrastructure, they're all getting better. People are building apps. At some point, those things. So I think in that world, right? But I don't think we live in that world. I think we live in a world where this kind of perpetual adolescence is over. You got to, like, this stuff matters. People realize it matters. Because a lot of the internet life, right, it evolved in this time when it was a little bit, like, joked about or it was dismissed. And that gave it kind of this 30, 40-year run of being able to not have to kind of deal with these policy questions. And I think that world has changed now. So I think absent that, I sort of think it's inevitable because I just look at the graph, like the things I talked about, like the price to do a transaction, like it's just dropping. And there's all these sort of trend lines that are going in the right direction. But and there's enough smart people, but I don't think we live in that world. I think we live in a world where like it's path dependent on what happened, and specifically like the bad stuff that happened, I think could be, and if that happens again, like those kinds of things, it's existential. Like the way I think about it, like I talk to my team about it, is like, I'm quite sure a lot of this stuff will rebound out of this, but like, do we do it in the right way or the wrong way is what I think about a lot. Like, do we do it by building great products that make the world better, or do we do it through like another speculative bubble or something like this? Like,
so your book is a call to action, really, right? To rally people to.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue. You could argue it's the worst time. You could also argue it's the best time, right? If you believe, as I do, that there's a lot of really excited builders who are building interesting things. What I'm partly doing is trying to, kind of influence them and sort of, and also people adjacent to them and around them. But I do think, like, I don't know, I'm just trying to outline, I guess, a positive vision.
Right.
That I hope.
So greater than 50% probability that the blockchain is a critical part of our future if everybody fights for it and supports it.
I think the tech trends are inevitable. There's tens of thousands of smart people working on it, which is sort of, you have critical mass of smart people. I think a lot of it is about how we guide it from here and whether we guide it in the right direction and whether we, start to really show positive use cases and applications and not, and move away from the speculation and the other kinds of things that have been harmful.
Chris Dixon, thank you for your time today. What a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate it. All right, we landed the airplane only a little bit over time. We do have some questions from the audience. I'm guessing, right, Michael?
Yes.
Okay, so Michael's been receiving your questions, and he's going to read the questions.
Yes, and I'm not sure how much time we have, but we'll do this until you tell me we're done.
Let's take 10 minutes.
All right. So there are a few questions that came in along the lines of, what do you think it will take in terms of either tech development or a killer app of some kind for Web3 to really go mainstream? What's the missing thing that will take this mainstream?
Yeah, I think it's. I think it's. I guess I think so. I have this this section in the book where I talk what I call the platform app feedback loop, which is this idea that why. I think a very interesting question is why. I mentioned the TV show Friends before, right? Like, you look at Friends. I was in like the dentist's office, and I was looking at Friends. I was thinking about this, and it's like a lot of stuff looks the same as, I think it was 25 years ago or something, whatever it was. A lot of stuff looks the same in Friends as today, like the dishwasher, the cars. I mean, they changed the design or whatever, but like the big difference is they don't have smartphones. Like, why does everything else seem to either kind of stay flat or maybe get slightly better, but the computing stuff gets so much better, right? And the usual answer you hear is Moore's law, which is important. Moore's law is that is used in different phrases, used in different ways, but essentially it's the fact that you can pack more semiconductors onto a chip. More transistors onto a chip. And that's important because in a lot of areas of engineering, you don't have 1000x improvements. Like with Moore's law, you have something like 100 to 1000x per every decade. And you just don't have that with bridge building or something, right? You just can't build 1000x better bridges in 10 years or something. So that's important. But there's actually another very important thing that goes on, which is what I call the platform app feedback loop, which is more of an economic phenomenon, which is the iPhone comes out and it's, the first iPhone was kind of junky and now your iPhone is great. But also the apps are a lot better. And what happened over that period of time is that the iPhone came out, and then people create a few like kind of mediocre apps, and then but it was popular enough that Apple had money to invest and make a little bit of better iPhone. And then the iPhone had a better camera or something, and then somebody came along and created Instagram, and Instagram made the phone more popular. And basically it's a back and forth feedback loop where the apps get better, and as the apps get better, it makes the infrastructure more popular, which gives them more money to invest in the infrastructure, and then the phone gets better, and as the phone gets better, it enables new apps, right? Like as the camera went to HD, actually I think Instagram launched on the very day that the camera went HD, so like and Snapchat and all these other, and then you have video, and then you have TikTok, right? So it's this back and forth feedback loop. And so that's what kind of I look at.
And that hasn't kicked in yet for the blockchain.
I think it's happening with blockchains, but it hasn't gotten to the sort of magical iPhone moment. And I actually have a chapter of the book. I call it the iPhone moment, and I sort of pontificate on this topic for those who are interested.
Michael, do we have another one?
As an investor in this area, could you say something about what you look for? What startups, what type of startups are interesting to you in this space?
Well, the way I think the way I think about venture capital is pretty consistent within blockchains and without blockchain. I've just been doing this now for a long time, and so I guess first I kind of separate the world. Well, I guess the first thing I will say is I look at the world primarily through the lens of people. And I guess one of the lessons I learned, I used to personally invest in companies as an angel investor, and I had this interesting experience where I had sold my security company, and in theory, I knew something about computer security, and then I made a bunch of investments, and my worst investments were all my security investments, and my best investments were my non-security investments. So I sort of scratched my head, I'm like, what's going on? And I realized that my problem was when they weren't security, I was just evaluating the people, because I didn't really understand the topic as well. When they were security, I was like projecting all of my visions of what I would be doing if I were involved in the company. And so that was, so it took me a couple of years and lost some money or something, but at that point realized that, that fundamentally, like no matter, you can fall in love with the ideas, but in the end you're investing in the people. A friend of mine Balaji has this phrase, the idea maze, that when you're starting a company, you're really not, you say what you're doing, but what you're really doing is you're running into a maze, and you're running around this maze, and you're exploring this maze. Almost every startup I've ever seen has ended up changing what they're doing, and the world has changed. And so you're really, as an investor, you're investing in people. It sounds like a cliche, maybe, but it's just so true that that's what you're doing. And mostly what we do is early stage investing. So I just look at the world completely. So the way I think about my job in a way is like I try to get smart enough to like be able to have a good conversation with entrepreneurs. Like I need to be sophisticated enough to really kind of intellectually spar with them, because then I can evaluate them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But in the end, if I win the sparring match, like that's not a good thing. Like they should be smarter than me, but I should be sort of smart enough that I can actually have the conversation. It's a very interesting thing with investing. Is like you want to there's a balance. There's a very interesting balance, right? Because you want to, on the one hand, know enough about the topic to be smart about it, but then you need to be careful not to overproject your views on things, and in the end, invest in people that are actually better than you at it. I don't know. So for me, it's just like whenever markets go up and down and this and that, and I'm always sort of like I sell myself like just the fundamentals, like people, technology, ideas, and so that's just kind of how I look at the world now.
Yeah, great. Maybe one last one, Michael. What do you think?
Yeah, what's the most fun you've had on the blockchain? It seems like a lot of technology is driven by fun, by entertainment, and I can see the kind of use cases, the practical uses, but what's fun that's going on the blockchain right now?
Well, I think actually this is one of my favorite ideas I didn't get a chance to talk about that I have a section in the book, which is about collaborative storytelling. It's one of my favorite ideas, which is this idea that sort of you think about all these fan communities on the internet. So people are debating on Reddit about Star Wars and whether Obi-Wan should have done this or that. I saw recently someone had recut like the Obi-Wan show as a YouTube video, and it was like just see all this crazy creative stuff. They argue about Spider-Man. I don't know, it's endless content around that. Now imagine if those communities, instead of just arguing about these things, could actually create new narrative worlds. And so there's a few startups doing this, where the communities come together, they invent narrative worlds, so they can invent sort of the next Marvel or Harry Potter, and then they're rewarded for their contribution with tokens. So you sort of earn tokens according to proportionate to how much you contributed, and how you figure out proportion is sort of part of the thing. So kind of Wikipedia style, the way that people come together to create encyclopedia, instead you're coming together to create a narrative world. And I think what's so nice about that idea is the fans, instead of being just sort of passive participants, become like active contributors. They can fork the world. They can create a new version of it. There's like different kind of, the same way you can fork on GitHub or something. They can have, you can have multiverse sort of like this version with this Spider-Man and this, it's not actually Spider-Man, they invent some new character. But the other interesting part of this story, right, is why does Hollywood have so many sequels? And it's all like, Marvel and Barbie and things like this, is because it's so expensive to market a new narrative world, right? It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to market these worlds, like to create a new world and market it. And so the other kind of neat thing here is that the fans can also then own tokens and have sort of skin in the game, and then become evangelists for these worlds. And so they're can be out there saying like, this is cool, I'm gonna create a game around it, I'm gonna create art around it, and they can kind of create a whole kind of community around it. And again, this goes to, so I don't know, I just think this is like, that's the kind of internet I wanna live on, is like this one where like active communities are creating cool stuff, maybe they're creating video games, they're doing whatever, and they're doing it in a way where they're making a real living directly without an intermediary. And you know, I just feel like it should be a time where it's a creative renaissance. Like the idea that, it's very strange to me that you have 5 billion people, anyone can create something, you know, 5 billion people can see it. You know, there's plenty of money flowing through the internet. It's not a supply problem, it's not a demand problem. People love music, people love, you know, writing, people love video games, people love these things. People love creating these things. Money is flowing back and forth. Like the only problem is the stuff in the middle. It's just somehow not getting from one end to the other. And so again, the other thing that's cool about the collaborative storytelling idea, right, is you're removing all the intermediaries. It's all happening in this decentralized community. And again, going back to the AI discussion and things, in a world where, you know, kind of maybe like some of the other, like the pure art generation is commoditized, maybe the right thing for communities is to be coming together and creating worlds or some other kind of thing. So it's just a kind of new it's just, for me, it's exciting in the same way, like when maybe I'll close by relating it to the beginning of our conversation. Like what got me so excited about the early 2000s is people would come to you and just be like, they had a brand new idea. It's just like, wow, that's a cool new thing. Like you could have a social network where like this happens and that happens, and just like, it was, I think you remember this, Rufus.
Absolutely.
It was just like,
yeah.
And to me, like that's just like a cool new idea. Like the first time someone told me that, I was like, wow, that is so, like I just started thinking about it for a few days. It's just like a cool new idea. So I don't know, is that fun?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have enough fun, I don't know. But like,
That sounds pretty cool. That sounds pretty cool. Wonderful. Thanks again so much, Chris. I think we'll have a few minutes here for cocktails. And
awesome, thank you all.
you know, I wonder with all